Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching a video about backup and recovery. In this video, I'm going to start off by showing you how to configure the shadow copy service. Now, this is something that is used to create backups of individual files for the users. Now, I say for the users because the really cool thing about this is not only do we have this automatic backup process, but the users don't have to ask computer administrators to recover the data for them. The users can actually go out there and recover that data all by themselves. Now, the main thing that you need to keep in mind when you're configuring the shadow copy service is when you want these backups to be made and where you're going to store them. So we'll take a look at how you set up that schedule and how you pick a storage location. After we've done that, we will create one of these backups, and I will then show you how to use what's called previous versions, or how the user would use previous versions to recover the data. After we're done looking at the shadow copy service, I'll show you how to install the Windows Server backup feature. And once that feature is installed, we'll have access to the Windows Server backup utility, in which we will be able to create a backup of a volume or even the entire system if we want to. After we have a backup, I will show you how to recover lost data. I'll show you how to recover individual files. I'll show you how to recover a complete volume, or possibly even recover the entire operating system. And once we're done looking at how to physically go into the system and do backups and do recoveries, I'll go over some handy little additional backup tips with you. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. And let's just jump right into one of our Windows Server 2008 computers and take a look at how this all works. For this demonstration, we could realistically connect to any of our Windows Server 2008 servers, because whether you are a domain controller, a member server, a standalone server, and although yes, we are talking about Windows Server 2008, even possibly a client, the backing up of data is always significant. But for this demonstration, we're going to go ahead and use New York Member 1. So let me go ahead and connect to that now. And while it's connecting, I do need to tell you that I made one small change to the configuration of this server since the last time we looked at it. And that change is that I have added a second hard drive. Now let me go ahead and click on Start and select Computer. This will take us into Windows Explorer because I want to show you that up to this point, we've always had just the one local C drive, just the one 80 gig hard drive. I have now added a second 80 gig hard drive, and I have formatted it as our D drive. Now the reason I did this is because when we're backing up data from the C drive, we're going to need a place to put it. And so rather than getting a tape drive or some other type of drive to go ahead and hook up to my system, I found it to be a lot easier just to go ahead and add another hard drive. So if you are following along with the demonstration, then you might want to go ahead and pause the video here and add another hard drive onto your system. If you're using a virtual machine, well then it's real easy. Just go ahead and add an additional virtual hard drive. Alright, now in order to demonstrate this for you, the first thing we need to do is create some data. So I'm going to go to my C drive and I'm going to create a folder. New folder. And we'll just call this backup data. Okay, it's not necessarily data that's been backed up, it's just the folder that we're going to use to represent the data that we want to see backed up. If I go into that folder, let's go ahead and create some data. I'll create a new text document and I will just call this backup1.txt. Alright, so we have backup1.txt, and if I go into that file, I'm going to go ahead and type in that this is the original. Okay, and close that and save it. Alright, so that's just to show us that this is the original file that I created. And the reason I wanted to create the original is because we're going to make some changes. Now, the first type of backup that I want to show you is the shadow copy backup. Now, let me go ahead and back out of this a little bit. Shadow copies are configured on each volume. So if I right click on the C drive and then go to Properties, you will see that there is a Shadow Copies tab. And if I click on that tab, take a quick look at this screen, see what it looks like here. because I'm going to actually cancel out of here and show you that a much faster way to get there is to right click, and they've actually added right here, configure shadow copies. And if I click on that, boom, takes you right to that screen. Either way is fully acceptable. Just thought I'd show you both ways to get there. And pretty much as is the case with all Microsoft operating systems, there's even more ways to configure these particular shadow copies than just the two ways that I showed you. But anyway, let's get into actually configuring these shadow copies. Now you'll notice that by default here, both my C drive and my D drive shows disabled. If I want to enable shadow copies on either one of them, just highlight it and click enable. Now I'm not going to click the enable button yet, and the reason why is because I want to configure the settings for my shadow copies before I enable them. So I'm going to click on the settings button. Now here you will see that it is the C drive that I am configuring. Then down here it says, well, where do I want to actually store these shadow copies? And I could store them on the C drive or on the D drive. Now you don't need to choose a different volume for your shadow copies. Matter of fact, it is quite common to use the same volume to store your shadow copies. And the reason why is because this is not a replacement for true backups. Okay, we'll talk about true backups in just a few minutes. But because this is just a feature to allow users to possibly kind of quickly and easily get back to a document that they've accidentally deleted or made some changes to that they didn't mean to, well, we can go ahead and store that right on the same drive where the data exists in the first place. So we'll leave it on the C drive. Now, the next choice that we have here is how much disk space we want to allocate for these shadow copies. And here you'll see the default of 8191 megabytes. Well, that's not random. The default will always be 10% of the size of the volume. And because this particular volume is 80 gig, 10% would be 8 gig, and that's what we have here. Now, I think that in most circumstances, that's an acceptable amount. I mean, depending on exactly what you use the hard drive for and exactly what the changes are, you may need to either increase or decrease this number, but 10% seems to pretty much work out just fine. See, and here's what's going to happen. As these copies of the data are being made and stored in this 8 gig space, they will just keep adding up until the space is full. So in other words, one document might have a half a dozen or maybe even a dozen backup copies. They'll all be timestamped with various dates and times after changes have been made. Well, once the 8 gig in this case has been filled, the oldest copy will automatically be eliminated to make room for the newest copy. So that's why you may want to reduce the amount of space if hard drive space is a problem, or you may want to increase the amount of space if you want to have more copies available to your users. For right now, we're going to go ahead and leave the default. The next thing that we have to do here is decide a schedule as to when shadow copies are going to be made. See, because they're not made automatically when changes are made to a file. They are made on a scheduled basis. So let me click on the schedule button. And you'll see here that by default, 2 shadow copies will be made every day of the week, Monday through Friday. Let me pull this down and you will see that one is made at 7 a.m. and one is made at 12 p.m. or noon time. And you'll see here it also says every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Okay, so that's by default from Microsoft. The way they've programmed it into the operating system is if you enable shadow copies without changing anything, at 7 a.m. and at noon every weekday, a shadow copy will be made of the data. Now, if you think that you need more than that, then all you have to do is click on New. When I click on New, you'll notice here that a third one shows up, and it even defaults that one for you. That one defaults to 9 a.m. every day. Matter of fact, this isn't even Monday through Friday. It's every day. If I don't like that, matter of fact, even if I don't like the 7 a.m. and the noon, all I have to do is highlight the one that I want to modify and then come down here and maybe I'll say, well, no, I don't want 9 a.m. Let's go back to weekly, and then we're going to say every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, just like we had with the default to. And I don't like 9 a.m. I want to, I mean, what sense does that make? I'm already doing 7 a.m. How about we do 5 p.m.? So now we're going ahead and saying at 5 p.m. every Monday through Friday, go ahead and run a shadow copy of my data. When you are scheduling the shadow copies, there are two things that you really have to take into consideration. One thing is you have to understand that during the time that it's making these shadow copies, performance may slow down, especially if you have data that is changing frequently. So that would mean that there's a lot of data that's being copied. The second thing you need to take into consideration is you want to make sure that you have enough shadow copies to cover the mistakes that people may make. Because here's the thing, if a user, and let me go ahead and drop this down so you can see the schedule again. If we're going to run a shadow copy at 7 a.m., 12 p.m., and 5 p.m., let's say at 1 p.m. a user creates a file. Okay, so that's after the 12 p.m. has already run. And then let's say at 3 p.m. the user makes a change to that file. And then they realize, oh shoot, I didn't want to make that change. I want to go back to my original. Well, they're not going to be able to, because the next shadow copy won't be till 5 p.m. So that's the other consideration that you have to have is, well, how often do I want to do this? How often do I need to make copies to cover the mistakes that my users might make? Now, if I don't want any of these, all I'd have to do is highlight it and then click delete, and that would get rid of that scheduled event. But for right now, I'm going to leave those 3 scheduled events, and I'll click OK. And then I'm going to click OK to get out of my settings window, but I want you to notice something. There's no trickery here. When I click OK, notice that the C drive has been enabled. Right? If I highlight this, you'll notice the enable button is grayed out. It's already been enabled, and it's already said, hey, I'm going to go ahead and schedule another copy at 5 p.m. And the reason it's going to make another copy at 5 p.m. is because it's currently, on this particular system, it's 2 p.m. So it has already passed the 7 a.m. and it's already passed the 12 p.m. So 5 p.m. would be the next one. If I don't want this enabled, all I have to do is come down and say disable, and that will turn it off again. But in this case, I want to leave it enabled. I just wanted you to know that by clicking on settings and setting those settings, it automatically enables as well. Now, the next thing I want to point out to you is this button right down here that says Create Now. This button gives you the ability to create a manual shadow copy that has nothing to do with the schedule. So if I click Create Now, it is going to go ahead and create a shadow copy of the data on my C drive right now. And as I said, on this system, it's around 2 o'clock. So at 2:03 this afternoon, I've just created a shadow copy. So that's how you configure shadow copies. Now, let's see how it actually can be put to use. So let me click OK. And then let's go back into our C drive and back into our backup data folder. And here we have our backup1.txt file. And if I double click on it, you'll see here that it's still the original. But if I go down here and make a modification and then close it and say save and go, oh shoot, I didn't mean to do that. Right? I didn't mean to actually save over the original. Oh, how many times have we done this? And then what do? We go in and go, oh shoot, I really did. I messed up the original. Now, obviously, in this case, I could fix this by just highlighting that and deleting it. But the point is that I've made a modification to this file, and I didn't want that modification. I either meant to close it without saving changes, or maybe I meant to do a save as and save it as another document so as to not overwrite the original. Either way, I've made a mistake. So what do? Well, what I can do is right-click on the file and go to Restore Previous Versions. Now again, you can get to this by going to the Properties, and then here's the Properties tab, Previous Versions. And in this window, you will see that it shows me that a previous version or a shadow copy of this file was made this afternoon. So I have a couple of options as to what I'm going to do with this file. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to click on Open. And the reason why is because, well, how do I know that this is the copy that I actually want? I click on Open. And then, sure enough, it says this is the original. All right, so that's the one I want. Once I know that, I have two choices now. I can either click Copy, and this is like doing a Save As. Okay, and this means that, well, I want to keep the newly changed version, but I also want to get back to the old version. And then it's going to ask me to pick a location where you want to save a copy. So I'm going to cancel out of there and show you that the other choice is I could click Restore. And if I click Restore, you'll see here that it says, are you sure you want to do this? Because what it's going to do is it will replace the current version. So you're actually saying, I want to go back to that old version and just completely get rid of the new one that I have. And notice, this cannot be undone. So you really want to make sure you know what you're doing here. Now in this case, I do know what I'm doing. I do want to restore that file. So I'm going to click Restore. It has been restored. Click OK and OK. And if I double click on this document, hey, look at that. It's been restored back to the original. That is how shadow copies and previous versions works. Now I will tell you, this was designed with the intent of allowing users the ability to go ahead and do this on their own without having to bother the IT staff. Okay, so you don't have to be somebody with administrative privileges to do this. But I will also tell you that a lot of administrators have chosen to not inform their users about this capability, out of the concern that maybe this will just confuse them further, or maybe they will restore something on top of a new version and then that new version's gone, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of administrators have trained their help desk staff to go ahead and know how to do this to help simplify the process of recovering a simple mistake that a user has made by overwriting a file or deleting a file. The choice is up to you based upon the environment you're in. All right, so let me go ahead and close this. And I will minimize this because the next thing I want to show you is the Windows Server Backup feature. Okay, and I emphasize the word feature because it's not a role, it's a feature. If I click on Start and go into the Server Manager, you will see that this is not only where you add roles, but also where you can add features. So let me go ahead and click on Features, and then click on Add Features. And then I'm going to scroll down here, and you will see that here's the Windows Server Backup features. Check the box, click Next. You'll notice there's really nothing else that it needs to ask me. I mean, it's just a quick little feature that it's installing. So I'm going to click Install. Now, as is the case with many of the roles that you've seen me install, this can take a few moments. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and I'll be right back with you as soon as it's complete. Okay, well, as you can see here, the installation has succeeded. So I'm going to go ahead and click Close, and go ahead and close the Server Manager. Now, one thing that I need to emphasize here is that there has been a dramatic change from prior versions of Windows. See, in all the previous versions of Windows, in order to get into the backup utility, you had to click Start, Programs, Accessories, System Tools, and then in here you would find Windows Backup. And a lot of people have wondered for many years why that was the location that it was in, and why you had to go through so many different submenus to get to an important product like backup. Well, Microsoft has made a change here in Windows Server 2008. Now you click Start, go to your administrative tools, which is where you would expect something like this to be, and here it is, Windows Server Backup. In Windows Server Backup, it'll take just a moment here while it analyzes the current state of this machine. But in this utility, you have the ability, well, first of all, you'll notice here it says no backup has been configured for this computer with a little warning. So it's kind of already telling you, look, you're not backing up this system, and that's not a good idea. So if I wanted to take care of that, I could go here and create a backup schedule. That's one option. Another option would be to back up once. Just take a one-time backup and then go from there. So let's start there. Let's make one quick backup. So I click on backup once. And this will take me into the backup once wizard. Now in the wizard, the first screen gives me the ability to create a backup either using the same options that you used in the backup schedule wizard, which you will notice is grayed out because we haven't used the backup schedule wizard yet. So if we had scheduled a backup, that would be one option, meaning we're saying, look, we want to do an extra backup beyond that schedule. We want to do one right now, maybe before some significant event. So I can quickly say, yeah, use the same options. Or I could say, no, don't use the options that were in the regularly scheduled backup. I want to create my own separate options. And that would be by clicking different options, which is, as you can see, my only option right now because I have no scheduled backup. So I'll go ahead and click on next. And now it's asking me, well, do you want to back up the entire server, which is always a good idea to make a complete backup, or to create a custom backup where you get to pick and choose exactly what you're backing up. For right now, I'm going to go ahead and do a custom backup. I'm going to click next. Now I get to choose which volume or volumes I want to back up. And you'll notice that by default, the C drive has been checked because it is included for system recovery. Now, that's because of this checkbox right here that says Enable System Recovery. If I clear that checkbox, meaning I don't want to do the operating system files, it no longer checks the C drive. Now, as it turns out, the C drive is exactly what I do want to back up. So I check the box. It just goes to included, but doesn't say anything about the system recovery anymore because this box is blank. I'm going to click next. I need to select a destination where I'm backing up the data to. Now, this is why I added that second hard drive, because I need to put it somewhere. So I'm going to go ahead and say I want to back it up to another local drive. If I click next, you'll notice that the C drive currently has 11 gig. If I want to back it up to the D drive, it currently has 79.91, or almost the full 80 gig available. So that is an acceptable drive to back up to. I'll click next. I get to choose, and this is an interesting screen that doesn't pertain to everybody, but I can choose what type of volume shadow copy service, or VSS, backup I want to create. And what this has to do with is if you are running database applications on this particular server, which type of backup do you want to do with regards to those applications? Now, the recommended solution is the VSS copy backup, and this is just a raw copy of the data, meaning we're not going to actually go in and have any effect on the application itself. And you'll notice right here it says this option retains the application log files. You would use this option if you had separate third-party backup software specific to that database application. And I agree with Microsoft on this one. This would be recommended. Microsoft is acknowledging that their backup software, although it's plenty reliable when it comes to backing up data, it's not a good idea when it comes to specific applications, because there's no way for Microsoft to know when they built the operating system that this particular utility is going to satisfy your specific needs on those applications. Now, if you do not have third-party software for those applications, then you can do a VSS full backup. And this is where you're using this utility for the backing up, like the true backing up of the application itself. And what that means is this is going to update the backup history and clear those application log files. So it's going to go through the full process of attempting to back up that application. Not always a good idea, although it in many cases does work. Now in this case, it really doesn't matter because I'm not running any specific database applications, but I'm going to leave it with the recommended copy backup where everything's just a raw data backup. If I click on next, you'll see it takes me to a confirmation screen, tells me I'm going to back up the C drive and I'm going to put it on the D drive. That is what I want to do. So I'm going to go ahead and click backup. Now, at this point, backup has begun. And you'll see here that, well, right now it says backup's not started. You know why? Because it's analyzing everything to make sure that there aren't going to be any problems. But in just a moment, you'll see that it will begin backing up. And once it does, well, there's a couple options that you have. One, oh, there we go, backup in progress. One is right here. It says you may close this wizard and backup will continue to run in the background. Yes, it is true. I could click close and I could go about my business and continue working on this server. Or I can leave this screen open and keep tabs on how long it's taking. See here it says 2%'s been done so far. 3%'s been done so far. All right, well, I think you're going to probably get bored listening to me count all the way up to 100%, especially since depending on the quantity of data that you have to be backed up and the speed of the drives and everything else on your system, this can take quite some time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pause the video while this counts up. And when it's 100% done, when it's complete, I'll come back and we'll continue from there. Okay, the backup has completed, and I will tell you, if you're following along, just for curiosity's sake, on my system to back up this almost 9 gig took just under 10 minutes. So like I said, sometimes it can take a few minutes, and sometimes, well, it can, quite frankly, take a lot of minutes, maybe even hours. So it really depends on how big the quantity of information is that you're trying to back up, and then also the speed of all your systems. But anyway, let me go ahead and click close. And you'll see here that it shows that a backup was successful. And the next thing I want to show you is how you would go ahead and set up that backup schedule that it keeps pushing us to do. You notice we still get that warning. I mean, heck, I just did a backup. Why is it warning me? Well, that's great that I did one backup, but unless you have a schedule, it's not real happy. So the way you would do this is click Backup Schedule, and you will notice that this wizard is almost identical. If I click on Next, you'll see here I get the choice between the full server or custom. We'll go ahead and leave full server. That's fine. Next. And by the way, the reason I'm doing full server instead of custom is, hey, this is my scheduled backup. I want this to always happen. So how often do I want it to happen? Well, once a day or more than once a day? Well, we'll go ahead and say once a day. And how about we go ahead and do it? Let's do it at some time that completely just won't affect us at all. We're going to say 2 in the morning. Okay, so once a day at 2 in the morning, we want to go ahead and do a backup. Click Next. Here I need to select a destination disk. So I'm going to click Show Available Disks. And then here I have that D drive. So I check that box and click OK. And then I check the box to say that I want to go ahead and back up to the D drive. When I click Next, check this out. When you finish, that disk will be reformatted and the existing volumes and data on those disks will be deleted. So whatever the location is where you're going to send this scheduled backup, you better make sure that that's truly what the purpose of that drive is, because it's getting wiped out. So if I go ahead and click Yes, it now tells me that that's where it's going to go. It's going to put a label on it. If I click Next, it gives me a confirmation, and I'll tell you what, I'm not going to click Finish. And the reason I'm not going to click Finish is because I don't need to actually do this. This was just for demonstration purposes, and what I don't want to see happen is I don't want to reformat and lose the data that's currently on my D drive. Otherwise, let me go ahead and hit cancel here. Otherwise, this backup that we just made was pointless. Okay, and I don't want it to be pointless because I'm going to show you in just a moment how to recover data. So anyway, I just wanted to go ahead and show you that you can go ahead and schedule backups in that fashion. Now, speaking of recovering data, let me go ahead and show you, first of all, how to go ahead and recover a file. The way I would do this is by clicking Recover. And this takes us into the recovery wizard. Oh, and hey, you know what? Before we do this, why don't we go ahead and make a mistake so that we can recover that mistake. So I'm going to cancel out of the wizard. I'm going to minimize my backup utility, take us back into our backup data, and, well, let's make a big oops, right? Let's take this file here, and I'm going to hold down Shift on the keyboard and hit Delete. Now, the reason I held down Shift while hitting Delete is because that's what makes it permanently delete the file as opposed to throwing it in the recycle bin. So I'm going to say yes. I want to permanently... Uh-oh. Oh shoot, what did I do? I just deleted that very important original document that I had. Oh, what are we going to do? All right, well, at this point, we've completely deleted the file. And yes, I will tell you, I could go to shadow copies to go ahead and restore it back in. But let's say, for the sake of argument, we don't have that ability. What do? Well, now we go into the Windows Server Backup Utility and click on Recover. And now, what do we want to do? Do we want to recover data from this server or another server? Well, it's this server I want to recover data on. I'll click Next. Now I need to pick the date and time that we wanted to back up from. And obviously I can't click on any other day but today because this is the only backup that I've created. So today at 2:17 I created a backup, so I'll click Next. And now what do I want to do? Do I want to back up the entire volume? Or I should say recover the entire volume? Or do we want to recover specific files and folders? And well, you know what? I don't want to recover the entire volume just because of one file that was deleted. So I'm going to say I want to recover specific files and folders. Click Next. Here it's scanning through my server. If I expand that, it notices that there's a backup that includes my C drive, and if I expand that, you'll notice that I can go through and I can select, so let me go a step further, backup data, and here's backup1.txt, and if that's what I want to recover. So I'm going to click Next. And I have to point out, by the way, before we go any further, this is something that is very cool relative to the way things used to be done. It used to be very difficult to break it right down to a specific file. I mean, now it's as easy as like just navigating Explorer and saying, boom, I deleted this file. It's part of the backed up volume. Give it back to me. But once I pick the file, then I have a choice here. Do I want to put it back in its original location, or do I want to put it somewhere else? And this really has to do with, are we recovering it for the sake of recovering it because it's gone, which is the case now. So that's why we'd pick original location. Or another location might be if we want to go ahead and back it up to an alternate location to take a look at, maybe analyze, maybe if it was overwritten, that would be an example, or if another copy needed to be made. But that is an option. We could put it in another location. When this wizard finds the files and folders in the recovery destination, meaning what if those files are still there? Well, then what do we want to do? Create copies so that I have both versions, overwrite the existing, or don't recover those files if there's an existing one. Okay, so these are kind of the choices that you now have to deal with if it finds duplicates. Now in this case, I don't need to worry about choosing any of these because, well, it's not going to find a duplicate. Now the last choice we have here is the security settings. Do we want to restore security with this file? And for all intents and purposes, this is always something that I think you should check yes. There's very few circumstances that you would not want the security to go with the recovered file. I mean, if you don't include that security, now you're recovering a file and it's going to be open for attack. So you don't want to do that. So let's go ahead and click Next and click Recover. Now, typically, this might take a while, but because I'm only recovering one simple text document, well, this will go very quickly. Matter of fact, it has already finished. Okay, it's already restored this file. It says, if I highlight this, it says restore this file is completed. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Close and minimize this utility. And hey, look at that. The file has been put back where it previously was. And if I go into that file, well, this is still the original, just like we had there before. So that is how you can back up a volume, how you can recover individual files and folders. And likewise, let me go back in here. If I click on Recover and click Next and Next, if I click that button right there, that's the only thing that's different as far as if we want to recover an entire volume. So let me go ahead and hit Cancel and close out of here. Matter of fact, I'm going to close out of everything because the one thing I still have to show you is how to restore a corrupted operating system. Remember, we had the option when doing backup to do an actual system backup? Well, if we need to do that system recovery, we do that by booting off of the operating system CD and then locating the backup that has the complete system recovery backup on it. So let me go ahead and demonstrate that to you now. What I'm going to do is go ahead and click Start. And we're going to go ahead and select to restart this computer. And I'm restarting the computer right now because the operating system DVD is already in the drive. I just put it in there. Okay, so when I click Restart, I'm going to go ahead and boot off the DVD. This screen right here, by the way, is the shutdown event tracker. This is a feature that Microsoft added with Windows Server 2003 so that you can actually have a log as to why you're doing a shutdown. So let me just go ahead, and this was planned. So we'll say we're going to go ahead and we'll say operating system reconfiguration. I don't know, that's not necessarily correct. So I could put a comment in here and I could say demo recover from backup. Click OK. And now the system will reboot. Okay, while the system reboots, we see here we want to press the any key to boot from the operating system DVD. And you'll see here it's loading the files from the DVD. It'll take just a moment here. And what we're going to see when this finishes loading is what looks like the operating system installation. But we're going to veer off of that installation just a bit, and we're going to choose to repair the operating system instead of installing it. Okay, here we have to go ahead and still go through this original screen to pick a language, so I'll click Next. And typically we would click Install Now if we wanted to install the operating system. But instead, right here, we're going to repair the computer. And then we need to choose an operating system that we want to repair. So it's part of what it does as part of its process is it scans the machine looking for existing operating systems, and it found Windows Server 2008. So I'll click on Next. And now I need to choose what I want to do this repair, and what I want to do is a complete PC restore. And when I do that, it looks for backups. And you'll see here that it found that on the D drive there was a backup that was run. So I could choose this backup and click Next, except for I have to tell you I can't actually do that. And the reason why is because this particular backup did not include the system recovery. Remember, I cleared the box. So if I had included that, then I could go ahead and click Next and recover the system this way. Since I don't actually have a system recovery, I have no real option here. But I just wanted to show you that this is how you would go ahead and do a complete system recovery. All right, let's go back now and talk about some additional backup tips. So a few additional backup tips you should always keep in mind. First of all would be make sure that your users store important data in a location which is backed up. One of the biggest problems that we have as administrators is that you have individual users who will save data on their own local hard drive on their client computer, and there may not be a backup system in place for that individual computer. So it's very important that you educate your users on exactly where to store data so that it'll be backed up. Now you can assist the users with this process by doing things like folder redirection, which is where you take common folders like their My Documents folder or possibly even their desktop, and although they will believe that it is stored on their own local computer, you can redirect it to being out on a network share on a server that is backed up. And so I have to tell you, not only is this a big problem for administrators, but even yours truly has fallen victim to storing data on a local computer and losing that data and having to go back and find other methods to either recreate or get that data back because it wasn't stored out on a server being backed up. This is a very important thing to keep in mind. Another thing is you want to make sure that you are very familiar with the backup media that you are using. Now what I mean by that is if you are using CDs or DVDs, well, you want to know exactly how much capacity they have. You want to know how quickly they can be written to. You want to know how much data can be written over a certain amount of time. You also want to know what's the shelf life of this data. You know, they now say that this optical data like CDs and DVDs have a much shorter lifespan than originally thought. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is depending on how long you need the backup, make sure that the lifespan of the media will handle it. Let me tell you another for instance. If you're using tape, well, tapes come in many different speeds and many different sizes. And so that's one thing to start off with, is how going back again to how much data we can back up in how much time. But also, tape backup is magnetic media. So you want to make sure that that media is stored in a location where it's not going to be anywhere near any magnets. And there's actually a funny story that I once heard from a computer administrator about some data that was being backed up, and then the tapes were being stored in a safe, and the safe was an old safe that used magnetic technology for the locking mechanism. And so what that meant was every time the tapes were being put into the safe to be secured, well, they were actually being erased or destroyed. So that's something you definitely want to keep in mind. You want to also make sure you have an actual backup strategy. I have walked into way too many environments where they use what I like to call by the seat of their pants method. You walk into a company and you say, well, where's your most recent backup? And that backup, you know, it was done, you know, they go, I don't know, I think it's been about a week or two since we've done backup. You don't want to just randomly say, you know, I think it's been a while, maybe we should run backup. That's why the Windows Server Backup utility really pushes for you to have that daily backup in place. But not only do you want to have a backup schedule in place, but if you're using removable media, such as backup tapes, you want to have a rotation so that you have multiple backup copies to be able to go back to. You want to go ahead and have some form of rotation in place. A very common one that has been very heavily used is something called grandfather, father, son, or the short version, you might have heard of it as GFS. With the GFS system, what that basically means is you have a backup tape, and it doesn't have to be a tape. You could be using CDs, DVDs, whatever. If you're using any form of rewritable, removable media, you want to have one tape for every day of the week. You want to have one tape for every week of the month, and you want to have one tape for every month of the year. As a for instance, that's one version of GFS. So that basically you have a tape for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That's how that tape is labeled. And the tape that you make on Monday, well, you won't use that tape again until the following Monday. So you know that you can always go back to any day of the last week. You'll also have another set of tapes labeled week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, so that each week of the month you have a tape, so that you know during a given month you can always go to the end of any given week. And then you want to have a tape labeled January through December, so that you have one for every month of the year. This gives you a very flexible capability to restore to different locations. Now, another piece of the backup strategy has to do with where you store these tapes or whatever media you happen to be using. Again, I cannot tell you how many times I've walked into a company, see a server, and then see a pile of tapes sitting next to that server. You really don't want to do that, because although that may help protect you against hard disk failure, it's not going to protect you against things like a fire or a natural disaster that destroys the building. So you want to probably implement some form of off-site storage. Now, the last thing I really want to emphasize to you is that you want to perform regular recovery drills. A backup strategy is no good unless you know for 100% that you can recover the data that you're backing up. So you should have regular recovery drills where you flat out say, boom, we lost data, we got to get it back. And the closer you can come to a real life scenario, the better off you are. So if you can actually create a situation where you maybe page certain administrators, maybe page them in the middle of the night, over the weekend, whatever it might be, and say, data is gone, please come in and take care of this, and see how they react, that's the best type of recovery drill that you can have. Because again, I can tell you, I heard a story. I have a lot of these stories when it comes to backup and recovery because data is so important. But it was a story about basically a guy who had a perfect backup plan in place. And he used this plan. Matter of fact, he did everything religiously according to plan for 3 years. And there was never a problem. But after 3 years, they finally had catastrophic data loss. He went to go recover the data. With confidence, he went to go recover the data. And he wasn't able to do so. There was a problem with the tapes. And he suddenly realized he now had nothing. So backing up is not good enough. You have to have actual recovery drills. All right. So now you have a few extra backup tips to keep in mind when you're setting up your overall backup and recovery solution. So let's see what we've learned in this video. By this point, you should now know how to set up the shadow copy service to automatically create backups of individual files for the users. Likewise, you should also know how to instruct your users on how to use the previous versions tab to get some of that data back. You should know how to install the Windows Server Backup feature and use the Windows Server Backup utility to back up your volumes or possibly your entire system. And you should also know how to recover lost data. Alright, well, I'll tell you what, if there was anything in this video that you don't get, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to go back and watch it again or make sure that you are solid, because data is one of the most important things to an organization.